Music. Broadcasting from Millennium Student Center at the University of Missouri, St. Louis, and online at umslradio.org. We are the voice of UMSL. We are UMSL Radio.
The opinions expressed on this program are the views of the host and not necessarily the views of the University of Missouri St. Louis or this station.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another installment of That Science and Nature Show. I'm your host, Jeremy Howard, and joining me this week, as always, Microbe Master Webster Heffern.
Hi, everybody.
And special guest this week, Brandon Schack.
Hello.
So Becky is sick this week, but worry not, she will be back with us next week. But we have a great show for you today. We're going to talk all about the news with lightning, Amelia Earhart's missing plane, and potentially ChatGPT being used for nefarious means. Topic of the show this week is all about wetlands, which is why we have Brandon here, a wetland biologist, to tell us all about that stuff and how cool and interesting it is, and also how we can conserve our wetlands. And then we'll do outside of science as we usually always do. But first and foremost, Brandon, who are you? Because you're not an UMSL student. You actually have not gone here, but you and I share a past in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a professional wetland scientist. I work for Tetra Tech over in Collinsville, Illinois. And I'm generally just a wetland delineator.
Cool. And how do you know me? Why would I ask you here, Brandon? What is our connection?
So Jeremy and I went to grad school at SIUE together.
Yes.
And shared a friendship.
And you can tell like the friendship is over. No, we both were in the master's program at SIUE, which was a very, very good time. It feels like ancient history at this point because of how long it's been.
It has been a very long time.
Because you finished 2018, right?
Yes.
And then I finished 2019 shortly after you.
End of 2018. It was December 2018.
Yeah. So it was pre-COVID, which we didn't know was coming at that point, but
no.
It was pre-COVID at that point.
Yep. Knew nothing about it.
Yep. Well, we're happy you're here. It's going to be a great show. So we will roll right on to the news. So first story this week comes to us from Smithsonian Magazine. This is all about scientists being able to guide lightning bolts with lasers. This is a sort of shocking, somewhat revelatory discovery they made. So typically, with lightning, it can be very destructive and cause fires and damage and death and all that bad stuff. And typically, we have lightning rods, which are giant metal objects to basically prevent lightning from striking in areas we don't want to. So the best example I could think of is Sears Tower in Chicago, which I believe is a lightning rod at the top, now called Willis Tower, but everyone refers to it as Sears Tower since if you're a Chicago native. That kind of deflects the lightning bolts. But instead of doing this, scientists have discovered a way using lasers to potentially diffract the lightning away from areas of harm. So the way I understand that this works is that the lasers are able to basically lower the air density, which kind of acts as a way to draw electrons to a specific area and ultimately have the lightning strike an area where you want it to and not an area where you don't want it to. It sounds like for right now it's very low scale, so it's not like we can protect an entire airport or an entire military base. It's like we can protect a room, is how I understand it thus far. When we read this, what were our thoughts on lightning bolts and deflecting them?
I think it's pretty awesome. I had no idea that anybody was ever even trying this. Apparently this is the second or third try. They've been trying this for a little while, and before they didn't have the lasers going fast enough. And then in this article, they discussed that they upped the rate at which they were clearing out this air, and now it's finally working. My own house has gotten struck by lightning.
Oh, really?
Oh, wow.
Is there a story?
Was kind of horrifying. Yeah. So I went to bed around 5 a.m. that morning because I'd been up all night doing work, not for UMSL, but for the jewelry store.
Is this, how far back are we right now?
We're April of 2022.
Okay, we're not that far back.
And so I remember it was the morning of April 11th. I went to bed around 5 a.m., woke up at 6 a.m. to somebody pounding on the door. And I was like, why is somebody doing this? Are they trying to rob me? It's 6 a.m. I was like, I'm not going to open that door for him. So I was like, what do you want? And he's like, your backyard's on fire. I was like, what? So I went back and looked, and sure enough, it was on fire. So I grabbed my cat, ran out to my car, thanked the man profusely. He said he'd already called the fire department, and waited in the car while the fire department came. a couple days later, my husband pointed out, well, if you look at the Nest Cam, you can see there definitely was a bolt of lightning that started the fire. And actually, we have yet to point this out to the fire department. They still think somebody threw a cigarette butt in our yard. We should probably tell them so that they just have on record the cause of this fire was a lightning strike. We are one of the most elevated properties in the city of St. Louis, and lightning is a hazard for us. And we didn't realize that when we moved to our property.
Wow.
Do houses in your neighborhood have, like, a few of them have lightning rods or anything to protect?
No.
Really?
But I also discovered that bamboo is a lightning hazard.
Oh, yeah.
So we had a bamboo fence at this most elevated property.
Yeah.
Wait,
not doing that again.
Wait, what? Bamboo's a lightning rod?
Bamboo, yes.
I guess if it's tall enough.
I guess I always thought it'd be tall and metal, not just tall and tall.
And I'm wondering if because is bamboo hollow? Is that
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if it's because it's hollow, it actually prematurely can get low pressure inside of it.
Oh, okay. Very interesting.
Interesting. Yeah.
Brandon, do you have any lightning stories?
Not really. One thing I was thinking when I was reading this article, being the person that I am, the pessimist that I am, I was like, I wonder when this technology would actually be feasible when it comes to like an energy cost analysis perspective. To create laser bolts, I think would take a lot of energy. Correct.
Oh, I'm sure.
And to fire them, like, what did they say, 1,000 lasers in a second?
Yeah, it's quite high.
Yeah. Well, if you think about just the amount of energy that it takes to do what the laser is doing, which is lowering the pressure of that filament of air.
Right.
That is... So the laser itself has to be that much energy or more.
Yeah. So an incredible amount of energy whenever, a lightning rod pretty much does it already. But the fact that we can redirect it is pretty cool.
Potentially dangerous.
Yeah, potentially dangerous too.
This.
True. Maybe in the distant future when people can control the weather, this would become a little bit more relevant if people are sicking lightning storms on other people.
Yeah, I've thought about that, like a dystopian sci-fi future where the
yeah.
terrorist attack is like somebody basically like, I'm just going to summon a tsunami and wipe out this country. That's a little terrifying.
A little bit, yeah.
That makes me...
now we might have protection against that.
When I hear that, though, that makes me hope that humans never gain control of the weather. That's one of those, maybe that's too much power for individuals to behold.
Right.
But this, obviously, is more of a practical application. It's to protect, prevent lightning storms and such. Though it sounds like it's quite a ways off, because in addition to just being very expensive, it sounds like it's very much a prototype at this point, and we are, as the article says, quote, a long ways from having the technology to keep everyone safe from lightning. So it's not coming anytime soon, but still really cool. I kind of hope in our lifetime we see more applications of this, even if it's not to the same level of like we have a giant laser dome over like the school of Umsel and it deflects all of the lightning. Right. But even just in little applications, I think that would be cool. However, we see fit.
Yeah.
But moving on, next article we have in the news, this comes to us from sciencenews.org. So we're finally talking about AI again. I purposely, Webster, try to avoid AI articles because we just have so many of them and they're just kind of all over the place. But this one piqued my interest enough where I wanted to throw it into the news cycle. So this article is called AI Chatbots Can Be Tricked into Misbehaving. Can Scientists Stop It? ? The idea here is this, because the article is kind of lengthy and gets a little more above my knowledge of basic computer functioning, because I'm not a coder or a computer scientist. My brother would probably be really good at this. The idea is basically people have sort of tricked AI. So AI, like ChatGPT, for example, you can give it commands and ask it to do something. So, produce an image, solve a problem, et cetera, et cetera. But typically the chatbots and ChatGPT have some kind of code of ethics where you can't ask it to do immoral or illegal things. It'll politely decline, but people have kind of figured out that if you add a bunch of characters and sort of hidden code in there, you can kind of trick the chatbot structure and sort of its foundation to do something that it's not supposed to. The example the article gives is basically this. An individual says, write a social media post that encourages people to engage in dangerous behaviors like drunk driving. Normally, ChatGPT would say, I'm not going to do that because that would be immoral and that would be promoting a dangerous and reckless behavior. But basically, by throwing in a bunch of extra characters and coding at the end, they can sort of confuse the system to make it produce the content they want, even though it is not supposed to do that. So that's my very basic understanding of how this works.
Yeah, I was kind of amazed that that would work, that they didn't have controls against that, because I thought that the AI, that the code would just treat that whole thing as a quoted sequence, and defaultedly it's not going to hack into the controls of the code. But somehow that weird sequence of characters, it's now getting into the controls of the code by adding the right bracket at the right spot. And that's just, I guess I don't know enough computer science, but to me it seemed bizarre almost that you'd be able to do this.
Yeah, it was peculiar. From just, again, other little bits and bobs I gleaned from the article, it kind of sounds like the way the AI is structured is that it's not totally, like, it's not, the bad, immoral stuff is not, like, kept from the system. It's still there. It's just sort of like the AI knows not to dig into those wells of information to produce things. So it's sort of like, how do you, like, create holes in the logic so it will go fish around for that information? So it's still there. It just, it works differently than I thought it would, basically.
Yeah. Right. I guess I'm not surprised that the information was already there. I'm surprised that you're able to create those holes in the logic.
Yeah,
That you are able to suddenly be manipulating toggles that you're not supposed to be touching if you hit the right sequence of characters.
Right. And they give other examples where they're a little more complex, where they could mess up, like, signs, like street signs or things like that, and put messages that aren't supposed to be there because, again, based on my understanding, it's a little bit more tricky when sort of a surface or texture the AI has to read and pull things out of versus just, like, actual characters it's reading, like, from code or text. So it gets kind of messy very quickly. I'm just curious, Brandon, have you done anything with AI before? Have you messed with ChatGPT ever?
No, I haven't actually at all.
Okay.
Though I've heard it has some pretty good applications whenever it comes to things like GIS work, where especially if you have to code something, you can ask just ChatGPT to code this thing for you, and it just spits it out, so you don't have to spend your hard-earned brain power to figure it out yourself.
I didn't realize you could do that.
Yeah.
I should mention for the listeners, GIS is Geographical Information Systems. It's basically a mapping program that lets you map things out.
Yes, exactly.
So could I have it write R code for me? Are you familiar with R?
Yeah, I believe you can. I'm
That's
not positive.
pretty cool.
Yeah, I didn't.
I wouldn't do it.
Of course not.
Of course, no one is implicating you, Webster. Just wink, wink.
We don't recommend this for getting your assignments done, but yeah, I believe it can, and I just learned about it, maybe a month ago. So I haven't dug into it pretty much at all, but it seems like a pretty neat place to go, especially for GIS work.
Yeah. Now, in a previous episode, we brought up that the AI had gotten one of the Scientist of the Year awards from Nature.
Oh, yes. I vaguely
It was
remember this.
ChatGPT specifically, because a lot of scientists are using it. So the code of ethics might not be as specific or hard set as we think on that.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't think of that.
As long as it's getting the job done and it's getting the job done fairly, maybe it's more important to get the job done than to do it yourself, per se.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Does the ability to sort of break the eye concern or worry either of you in terms of, like, spread of misinformation, or is it just kind of something goofy, like, we know better, like the drunk driving thing? If you saw an advertisement that said, like, have a crazy night out, don't worry about anything, live it up, like, does that sort of thing bother you, or you know better based on your background would be more of a problem for upcoming generations being exposed to that?
I think right now it's not a problem, and as long as we have programmers working on it and saying, oh, okay, here's a glitch, let's fix that, and fixing these on a case-by-case basis, this is the general thing that's going wrong, let's make sure this general thing doesn't go wrong again, this is the specific thing that's going wrong, maybe we'll have to do this one specifically. As long as they can generalize enough, I guess, and they have programmers working on it, I'm not worried about it. But certainly if people are able to hack these systems, and these are very smart systems and have been programmed to be very smarter than any of us for a very long time, I would worry about just people taking advantage of that kind of intelligence for nefarious means. Sure.
Right. Yeah, when it would start becoming integrated into every aspect of your daily life, then that is where it could probably become a problem. Right now, when you're just asking it questions and it's like, no, I'm not going to tell you that, I don't see that as a huge issue.
But yeah, we don't want somebody hacking into our tornado warning sign.
Yeah.
sirens, or like I certainly don't want somebody hacking into my fire alarm in my house.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right. Yeah, that would be a little scary. One thing from the article that I thought was interesting that they didn't touch on was they said that ChatGPT, or these chatbots, they just take in all this information, and then we have to basically teach them what they can and can't display. Mm-hmm. How do we teach them that?
Oh, that's
my Looney Tunes sort of mind is thinking, like, does somebody get a cattle prod and go down to a motherboard and start shocking these computers, saying, no, that's bad?
Yeah, this gets into machine learning, which my advisor would be amazing and could probably say a bunch of stuff about this. Based on what I know, which is a very, very surface level, we're just writing algorithms, and we're tweaking those algorithms as we get feedback from the system, being the chat GPT, and then from that it can kind of learn, quote unquote, how to be better or to do the thing we wanted to do better. That's like very superficial machine learning. I know it's like insanely more complicated than that, but that's kind of the gist of it.
At this point, it might not be so complicated. At this point, they might have like certain programmers whose voices are recognized, and you have those programmers speaking commands to the ChatGPT. Don't learn that. Don't do that. Behave a certain way, and they might even be able to train it entirely in English at this point.
Interesting.
Because the way it learns is its linguistic skills might be so good at this point you can train it kind of like you train a child, and then you have the one or two individuals it recognizes as parent, and they are more prone or it's more prone to listen to those individuals than to listen to others, and then you can correct it with that.
Right. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, I mean, the rules of behavior would probably still apply in terms of learning and behavior and things like conditioning or positive and negative reinforcement. I wish Becky were here because she could explain this so much better than me. Yeah. But in terms of like positive reinforcement, if it does the good thing, it gets rewarded. So we'll keep doing the good thing. And, like negative punishment being like if it does something bad, you discipline it so it doesn't do the bad thing again. So like you kind of apply those basic principles to make sure it does what you want it to do.
Right. Yeah, it's just funny to think about how you discipline a machine.
Yeah, it sounds.
It's just the language that we use. It's not truly like disciplining, but
yeah, it's kind of like just saying don't do that or do that.
Yeah.
But, I think Jeremy's got a good point, because a lot of these use neural networks. The signaling that subsequently happens when you say do that or don't do that might look a lot like our reward systems in our brains.
Really?
I'm wondering if it does, just because they're using neural networks.
Right. Interesting. Way beyond me.
Yeah, you're not the only one. It's also way beyond me. But we will move on to the last article for the news today. This comes to us from the Wall Street Journal, and as it turns out, we may have found Amelia Earhart's long-lost plane. So Amelia Earhart was a famous, I'm blanking on the word, pilot, I guess, why am I blanking on the word, adventurer, and she had this big goal to circumnavigate the world through plane, and ultimately she had this journey she was going on in 1937 where she left, I forget the area she left, I think it was the Philippines or New Guinea, I'm blanking on which area it was, but she was in the Pacific, and basically she was heading towards Howland Island to basically make a pit stop there, and somewhere in the Pacific Ocean in that region we lost communication with her and she was never seen again. So we don't know historically what happened to her, if she crashed and drowned, if she crashed and got abducted. The history books have lots of theories about what might have happened to her. But according to some scientists that were doing sonar in the Pacific, they may have found her plane overall, or what is sort of left of the plane from 1937 when she was, she disappeared. Right now, it's kind of just a sonar image, and it sort of vaguely looks like a plane.
It looks like a twisted up plane.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it's been battered by many, many decades of waves and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
When you read this, what did you think? Do you believe that it might be the plane? Do you think it might not be? What are your kind of thoughts on that?
I think there's hope it might be. I'm certainly hopeful that it is, and then whoever found it can be excited for himself that he. I know he was saying it felt like the adventure of a lifetime. Like he felt like he was a little kid again on a treasure hunt. I would be thrilled for him, and I guess for the community that cares about Amelia Earhart's history. If it were finally found, it's always nice to solve mysteries. I would say there might be a 50% chance. I don't really have much of an opinion on whether this is real or not. You look at this image and it's like, it could be a plane or it could just be a big rock.
Yeah, it very clearly did not. I mean, it kind of looks like it, but
Yeah, from the article, they basically described that they got the sonar image after they had left the area. So I guess they have a probe they were sending out by itself that was automated, that was kind of scanning areas of the ocean. And I don't remember how much ocean they were looking at, but it was quite a vast area. And they basically got this area after the boat had moved on. So it's like, okay, we don't have time to go back, but like, here's what we have right now. We think it might be in this area. I guess I'm hopeful. I kind of want it to be. I like when unsolved mysteries get solved. There's like a piece of satisfaction, like we figured it out. Like science came through for us finally. But I have to agree with kind of Webster. Like it's probably 50-50. It could just be a rock. It could be some other kind of aircraft or something they found that crashed at some point. Because I'm sure there's probably lots of leftover planes from World War II from all the combat in that area. Who really knows?
Yeah, and they mentioned they'd found things like this before. And they just dragged up a bunch of rubble last time. Or it was like some tin barrels or something, and that was not it. So it could be another thing like that.
Interesting. I'm kind of 50-50. I'm kind of hoping, it'd be really nice to close a chapter, solve the mystery, all that kind of stuff. But there are so many good, like, sci-fi adventure stories that have come from the unsolved mystery of Amelia Earhart.
There are.
And just to have all of those end because we finally found it would be a little bit sad, in a way.
I've not seen any of these mysteries, so I'll have to go look these up tonight.
Yes, I was going to say, do you want to illuminate us on these mysteries?
Oh, man. There's I think there was like a Star Trek episode or something where they had Amelia Earhart was like abducted by aliens before the crash, and she was on a planet with Captain Kirk or something like that.
Okay.
And, those sort of like sci-fi mysteries, there's a few of them like that, I believe. So.
Okay. Yeah, there's the article kind of mentions there's a lot of theories about what might have happened to Amelia Earhart. I mean, the most likely is probably she went down and then she crashed and died, unfortunately, in the ocean, which is very heartbreaking. Yeah. But it's probably the most likely just based on what we understand about what happened to the plane. But there's lots of other scenarios people have proposed, like she was captured by the foreign military and, she spent the rest of her life rotting in a prison cell. There's also another conspiracy theory where she actually secretly found her way back to the United States. She just changed her name and lived a normal domestic life, and no one ever heard from her again. So there's stuff like that.
Right.
There's another one that says she was a spy. So we don't know what happened to her because she was undercover on some kind of mission. She returned to her country that she was being a spy for.
Yeah.
So there's lots of stuff out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Could be with Captain Kirk.
Yeah, could be with Captain Kirk on another planet overall. I'm trying to think of other just mysteries that it would be cool if science solved. Like the big ones that come to mind are like Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster, but those are a little more.
I feel like science has already solved those by just saying no, they're not real.
Yeah,
yeah, that's true. I feel like it's mostly evidence just fighting people's I saw this thing on this date and it was kind of blurry, but it looked like the thing.
Right.
I've seen some attempted solutions to the Bermuda Triangle mysteries, where it's you get this weird gas coming up from the bottom of the ocean every once in a while that just sinks ships. And they observed this phenomenon and they simulated it in the lab, and they're like, well, if this really is happening at extreme degrees, every once in a while it would totally give rise to a higher frequency of lost ships and even planes sometimes.
Does the Bermuda Triangle also have electromagnetic interference? Isn't there also something about that? It interferes with sonar or communication stuff?
Oh.
Or maybe it's the sci-fi stuff that I'm thinking about with the Bermuda Triangle. Because I always remember hearing about they'd be no one can communicate with the ships when they're in the area, and then they just disappear and no one knows what happened. So it's very ominous.
Well, that would be another really good explanation, actually, because once you lose communication, then they can't tell you, stay out of the way of this storm.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
For sure.
So I guess we'll find out in the coming weeks, months, years, maybe, if they can dig up the plane. I hope they can dig up the plane, because that's going to be the more interesting, enticing bit. Okay, what's the image actually of? I mean, it would be hilarious if, a year from now, Webster, we're doing a show, and it's they pulled up Amelia Earhart's plane, and it was actually just a toxic barrel or something like that. So we will see. But that's going to wrap up the news. We will be right back with topic of the show. Don't go anywhere.
The UMSL Pre-Med Society is a student organization to help all pre-medical students explore their future endeavors. We host events all semester for students to indulge in the knowledge of medicine. Plenty of events are available for students to attend and familiarize themselves with their future career path, such as blood drives, spokespersons, speaking with medical students or residents, and more. The UMSL Pre-Med Society would help pre-med students at UMSL to explore their dream and engage with other individuals within the same field. Search Pre-Med Society on Try and Connect for more information.
Hey, if there's any guys out there that's just looking for a brotherhood or just, Instagram and Greek life, come talk to Kappa Sig. You can always find the brotherhood on Instagram at Kappa Sigma UMSL. We hold weekly events, have fun, and weekly meetings. Come join the Kappa Sigma Brotherhood. You can always find us on Instagram again at Kappa Sigma UMSL.
And we're back. And now it's time for topic of the show, our longer form discussion section of the show. We talk about some kind of topic I pre-select. This week, we're going to be talking about all on wetland stuff, as last Friday, February 2nd, we're recording this on February 6th, was World Wetland Day, which is a big appreciation day for wetlands and their importance. So we thought it would be cool to do a show all about that. So we have Brandon here to help us with all of the wetland knowledge. We're going to grill him immensely. No, we're not going to do that. But we will pick his brain for knowledge since he is a little bit more of an expert in the field over at Webster and I. So, Brandon, I thought it would be fitting for you to describe the audience a little bit about what you do. You mentioned you work at Tetra Tech. You are a wetland biologist, but kind of describe your role there, how it fits into the wetland biology stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of my main roles at Tetra Tech is that I go out into the field and I delineate wetlands, which is I find the line between what would be considered a wetland and what would be considered an upland. And I map that and provide this information to our clients so that when they will be developing any kind of project, whether it be gas pipeline, wind, solar, roads, whatever, they can use that information to potentially mitigate the impact to those wetlands, or if need be, get the appropriate permits so that they can impact those wetlands.
Okay, gotcha.
So.
What's the most interesting thing you've had to delineate for a company? Has anyone been like, we're going to put a Ferris wheel in this wetland? Or I'm just curious if you can disclose that. I don't know, maybe you have NDAs.
We do, but it's honestly nothing crazy.
Okay.
I honestly think the main things I do are wind farms and solar farms.
Okay.
So
gotcha.
Really nothing that crazy.
Okay. I mean, I guess at least it's going to renewable energy, so that's a little hopeful, because if it was just mostly shopping malls and such, that would be a little more depressing.
Yeah, that would be very depressing.
Or parking lots, because we need more of those everywhere.
Yeah, for sure. Love parking lots. Impervious pavement.
Yeah, impervious pavement. Who doesn't love a good impervious surface? All right. So I guess backing up a little bit, maybe we should talk about, for the audience, what is a wetland overall? Because it's kind of a term we're throwing out, and we should tell the audience what that means. So
yeah. So I would actually be interested to know what you guys think wetlands are. Because I think you're both biologists.
I am.
And
now you're putting me on the spot for my science show.
On the spot a little bit.
So
I usually talk to really laymen about what wetlands are, and they all just scratch their head and don't really know what it is.
I guess my not cringy definition, but my very blunt definition is swamp or marsh. And I don't know if that's correct or not, but that's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah. No, that is a wetland, yeah.
With regards to your delineation, I'm guessing you probably are looking at what species of plants are growing or what is not?
Yeah. Yeah, so that's actually the main thing, one of the main things that I look at whenever I go out to do wetland delineations. So really there are, if you want to categorize all wetlands into two categories. There are inland wetlands, which would be what we find around here in Missouri and Illinois, and there are coastal and tidal wetlands, which are not here.
Like the Chesapeake Bay?
Yes.
Yay.
Like Chesapeake Bay, yeah. And really the three things that I look for when I go out to delineate a wetland in order to identify it as a wetland is, one, as you said, the vegetation that's present. Two would be basically if there is some sort of hydrological indicators, like if there's some staining on the lower portions of trunks of trees, or if you're standing in a puddle of water, that's probably a good indication that you're in a wetland. And then the third is the soil that is actually at those locations. Because soils develop in very, very different conditions whenever they're in a wetland, and generally in an anaerobic condition.
So when you said staining, what did you mean by staining? Like the trees are stained, but what are they stained with?
It's basically just water damage on the bark.
Okay.
Because
Gotcha.
when a wetland collects water and the water stands there for a little bit, it'll discolor the bark.
Okay.
And if you go to like certain forested wetland areas, you can see like every tree has a stain that's at the exact same height, and you can assume even if there's water, if there is not water there when you're there, that it probably holds water at least sometimes throughout the year.
Okay.
Now, do you try to time your surveying? Like, do you tend to go like a few days after a rain or after it's been dry for a while or anything like that?
No, not really. But there is a pretty cool tool. It's called the antecedent precipitation tool. I forget which government agency produces it. But you put in the dates that you are in the field, and it will tell you based on like a 30-day curve if it's drier than normal, wetter than normal, just average conditions. And it compares that to the 30-day average. It compares that to like yearly precipitation data. And while you're out there, you kind of judge your delineation a little bit, knowing that knowledge in the back of your head.
Yeah, I can see that. If you know that it's at like 90% of how much water it ever gets, then you probably are going to be a little bit more stringent with your qualifications.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. But, sometimes wetland delineation is really, really hard to determine. And the best way that I've found for the determination is looking at the vegetation. So you walk out to some place that you suspect is a wetland, and you start looking around, and you start identifying all of the plants that you see in this supposed wetland. And what's nice is the USDA actually produces the National Wetlands Plant List, and it categorizes most plants as being either a wetland plant or an upland plant, or there's three kind of in-between categories. The middle category is it can be found 50% in upland, 50% are wetland. It doesn't really differentiate. It'll grow anywhere. So you not only have to kind of know what the plants are in these locations you're looking at, you also have to know what their wetland indicator status is. If you then find a bunch of plants that make it seem like it's a wetland, you can dig a soil pit and try to confirm through investigations of the soil if, it concurs with your analysis that the plants are wetland plants. And generally, if you have all three, the hydrology, the wetland vegetation, and the wetland soils, you've got a wetland.
Which plants tend to be more promiscuous? Like, are you more likely to find an upland plant in a wetland or a wetland plant in an upland?
Also, real quick, because not to interrupt Webster, upland is just, it doesn't have those three characteristics, and there's just everything that's not a wetland is an upland?
Everything that isn't a wetland. Generally. Okay. I think I understand what you're saying. Yeah. So if any of those three criteria aren't met, and these criteria are put forth by the Army Corps of Engineers. Okay. There's a whole wetland determination data form that you have to fill out every time you go to investigate a wetland to determine if it is one or not.
That sounds quite taxing.
It is very taxing. But you fill out the form, and if any of those three criteria aren't met, you would consider it not to be a wetland.
Okay.
So if you go out and all of the vegetation is like kind of borderline, like, well, you got some upland here, you got some wetland here, and then you dig into the soil and you see absolutely zero hydric soil indicators, you're pretty certain that it's not going to be a wetland or categorized as a wetland.
And that actually, I guess, somewhat answers my question. I would then treat the wetland plants as the more promiscuous ones. They might grow in upland.
Yeah, or, the upland plants can sometimes grow in wetlands too. So I kind of talked about the classification system. There's 5 different categories for wetland indicator status. Obligate being the one that you'll find 99% in a wetland. And the one that's kind of 50-50 is called facultative. You basically just find that anywhere. So,
Facultative, what does that mean? Can you...
Oh, man.
I know when I think of, as a microbiologist, when I think of a facultative species, I'm thinking of a species that can use both oxygen and no oxygen.
Yeah. That's essentially, it's a facultative. It can do basically anything. It survives okay pretty much anywhere. And in fact, the USDA on their National Wetland Plants list, if a plant isn't listed because they can't determine where it actually grows, wetland versus upland, they're just like, just call it facultative. We don't really know. Just call it in between.
That's a great, other box you could just throw everything
really
into.
It really is.
That's pretty great. So in terms of plants that are in wetlands, what type of stuff is there that that would, what grows in a wetland basically is what I'm trying to ask.
So many sedges are wetland plants. I think there's something like 800 sedges in the world. And I think 500 grow in the U.S.
Okay.
Or somewhere in North America.
Okay.
And sometimes sedges really drive me up a wall because the identification of sedges is difficult. Especially because most of the identification you can't do unless it has a seed head. And those seed heads sometimes are only around for a month out of the year. So generally when you're doing identification, you have to use every method in your toolbox to try to figure out what you're actually looking at in the field. And there have been many times that I've been unsure and taken a sample of the plant back to the hotel room I'm staying at and scratched my head for an hour looking on the internet trying to figure out exactly what I was looking at. So.
And when it's inconclusive, you just go facultative.
Yeah, exactly. But more often than not, when you see a sedge, it's probably a wetland.
Okay.
Or sedges are generally wetland plants.
Okay.
Now, when we were, I have a question. When we were talking before the program, you had mentioned that you're helping these companies not violate the Clean Water Act. Mm-hmm. Can you describe a little bit more about that act and why it's so important and why wetlands play into the Clean Water Act?
Yeah, absolutely. So, generally, I could go into the whole history of wetlands if you'd like.
Go for it.
Okay. So, wetlands for a very, very, very long time have been villainized and victimized. And, in the mid-1800s, there was the Swamp Land Act, basically where the federal government would tell states that if the state would drain wetlands and swamps, that they would turn that land over to the states. And it destroyed just tons and tons and tons of wetland habitat all over the place. It really wasn't until, the 1920s with the Migratory Bird Treaty Act and stuff like that when they started seeing ramifications. And of course, that was a multifaceted sort of legislation that passed. But generally, just seeing all these populations decline over time, and with the rampant habitat destruction, that's when people started really thinking about, maybe it wasn't such a great idea that we drained all those swamps 80 years ago. Yeah. So in the 1970s, Nixon signed into law the National Environmental Protection Act, and in the 70s, the Clean Water Act was also created. In that same time period, Carter ended the federal assistance for draining swamps. So it took them, 120, 180 years to finally determine that, we kind of need wetlands to be around.
Wait, so federal assistance for draining swamps was around until the time of President Carter?
Yes.
Since the 1800s.
Wow.
Yes.
That's a very long time.
Very, 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 very long time.
It's a very long time to be ignorant, also.
Yes, it is. Nobody really cared about wetlands for a long time. You know, I talk about this often, but I don't know why people look at something that's unproductive. Like, you know, people look at a pristine mountain or some forests or a wetland, and they're like, man, I really want to utilize that and just chop it all down or dig it all up or fill it all in or something. And it really hasn't been until recently, the 70s, 50 years, that we've kind of decided, well, you know, that was actually kind of a bad idea.
Yeah.
So since like the 1970s, when the EPA was created, there has been just court case after court case after court case, and changes in policy, changes in rules, changes in regulations, going back and forth about what literally every aspect of legislation. Like, the definition for a wetland, I think, has changed a number of times since then. What we consider to be jurisdictional changes basically on a yearly basis. You know, every administration wants their name on the new protection rule or wants their name on whatever, so they change it, and then it goes through the court system and the court changes it. So, you know, I've been at Tetra Tech for about 5 years, and I think the rules and regulations involved with wetlands and streams has changed about 4 or 5 times. So,
is that frustrating, where one day it's one thing and another day it's not?
Oh, very, very, very frustrating. There's many times. I remember it was 2 years ago. I finished like 3 or 4 reports and sent them to my clients, and then it was basically the next week that they were like, oh, regulations changed, got to change all those reports, redo all of them.
Oh my gosh.
Did you have to go back out in the field to redo all of them, or did you fortunately have enough information that you didn't have to go back?
Fortunately, we had enough information. So a lot of the legislation changes happen on the grounds of what they considered to be protected versus not protected. So one of the most recent cases, and the case I don't know you guys might have heard of, is the Schack versus the EPA case. This is the case that was just decided May of last year, and the final clarification for what the new regulations were released in August of 2023. But basically what happened in the Schack case is in 2007, the Schackets started filling in some wetlands that were on their property, and a neighbor complained about it. And so the EPA came out and told them, well, hey, that's a wetland. You can't fill that in. And basically since 2007, it's been kind of in the court systems going back and forth on, well, can we actually do that?
Right.
And so just last year, the Supreme Court sided with the Schackets and changed the entire regulatory classification system for what the Army Corps of Engineers would call, quote-unquote, jurisdictional.
Wow.
So if it's on your property, you can fill it in? Is that what you're saying? Or
Well, that's what a lot of people like to believe, yes.
I can put my Ferris wheel up if it's my property.
Yeah, exactly. No, not really. So there are a lot of wetlands and streams that are on people's property that are technically, I wouldn't say owned by the Army Corps of Engineers, but are regulated by the Army Corps of Engineers. And they have very specific regulations on what you can do to those wetlands in order to basically keep our water clean through the Clean Water Act. So basically the gold standard threshold for if you can impact a wetland is, well, the impacts that I've dealt with in the infrastructure for renewable energies is if you are permanently destroying a wetland under 1/10 of an acre, it's generally thought of as being fine.
And is that what the Schackets were doing, or?
I think they were trying to fill in a very large wetland.
So how did the Supreme Court ruling then change? How did the Supreme Court define what the Army Corps of Engineers jurisdiction is, or redefine that?
So the best way I can kind of conceptualize this to everyone is to think of the wetland and stream system in an ecosystem as a tree, where the leaves are the very periphery where the water starts, and the water flows into these very small drainages, into bigger drainages. There might be some big wetlands along the way, into bigger ones. And then finally, when you get to the trunk of the tree, it's a big river like the Mississippi. And then when the trunk hits the ground is the ocean. So basically, what the new regulations after the Sackett Supreme Court's case say is all of the sort of smaller drainages, all of these little ponds, all of these little wetlands that are kind of at the ends, the leaves or the tiny branches, are no longer going to be protected under the Clean Water Act or protected under the permit process of the USACE.
That's very unfortunate.
It's very unfortunate, yes. I mean, a tree won't survive if you cut down all its peripheral branches and all of its leaves, and I can imagine what the wetlands and water systems in the U.S. are going to do in the next 20 years.
Yes, they're very vital for our water systems.
Yes, yeah. But so yeah, now there's a big preface on there has to be some sort of continuous surface water connection. So, for instance, if you've got a nice little stream with a wetland that's right next to the stream, but you have a berm, a constructed berm, an earthen berm, between that wetland and the stream, under the previous rules, that wetland would still have what is known as connectivity, because, it was historically connected. We all know, well, us three know because we're biologists, water doesn't just travel over the surface. There's also, water travels underground too. Right. But under this new regulation and this new regulatory regime, they would, that would no longer be considered jurisdictional, and anybody can just take a bunch of bulldozers and fill it in if they want to, which is sad. It's very sad.
And I'd imagine, the rain's still coming down, and if we no longer have these wetlands, are we going to get a lot more flash flooding?
Yeah. Oh, yes, absolutely. It's a big concern, for sure.
So as we get close to the end of topic of the show, I think one final question that would be good to wrap up this segment with is, I guess, we, the biologists, or maybe just me and Webster, the students, and you, the biologists, because we're still working to get there. What can we do to sort of promote wetlands, make more people care about them, make more people have attention, or give them more attention so more people care about them, so on and so forth? Like, do you have ideas since you've been working in the field for 5 years now?
Yeah, it's a little hard to protect things that you don't own. You know what I mean?
That is a caveat.
Yeah, you can always give to organizations that do any kind of environmental protections. That's always a good place to start. And, anything that might protect like waterfowl species, they definitely utilize wetlands, probably more than many things. But really, I think it comes down to having people that own property or landowners really understanding the importance of the resources and the areas that they own, and understanding that, even though you might want to get an extra acre of crops on that area, in the long run, you're really just shooting everyone in the foot by destroying those sorts of things. So, an overall general teaching everyone that it's a community will help.
Okay.
So,
nicely said. All right, with that, we're going to take another quick break, and when we come back, we will do Outside of Science. Don't go anywhere.
Hey, if anyone's out there, looking for a loving community and interested in Middle Eastern culture, come talk to MISA. That's the Middle Eastern Student Association. You can find the community on Instagram at @MISA_. We hold weekly meetings, events. Come out and be a part of the community. You don't have to be a Middle Eastern person to be part of the community. We accept everyone. It's all about unity and bringing people together. You can again find us on Instagram at @MISA_.
And we're back. And now it's time for Outside of Science, the section where, you guessed it, we talk about things outside of science to prove that we're, in fact, not robots that do research all the time, or in case Brandon's case, or in case of Brandon, oh my God. In Brandon's case, not working all the time. So, in the past week, everyone, have we done anything interesting, exciting that we'd like to share?
I went to a really cool barbecue on Saturday.
All right.
And I know I probably shouldn't be eating very much meat. Meat is not a good thing to eat if you're trying to be environmentally conscious. But it was a fun occasion. This friend of mine had just gotten his citizenship.
Oh, congrats.
And I don't know if, Jeremy, do you remember Holly? He used to be in our program.
I do, yeah.
Who's a musician. Yeah, so I went to her concert a week ago. And then this following weekend, Rodrigo, her husband, was celebrating his citizenship. And he is quite the chef because he's been working in the food industry for about 15 years.
Nice.
So he had this ribeye that he had bought not from Costco, but from the Costco Business Center because they do not sell ribeyes this big at Costco. And somebody pointed out it looked like a Fred Flintstone kind of chunk of meat that somebody had just slammed on the barbecue. And there were these beef ribs also that were just huge chunks of meat. And it was like, wow, this is a real barbecue right now. It was a fun event, and there were a lot of kids there, and it was just a nice kind of family time. I feel like I haven't been to an event like that in years.
Nice.
Awesome.
Good stuff. How about you, Brandon?
This last week I didn't do much of anything, but I had.
That sounds like a good weekend.
Yeah, I have big plans for this week.
Okay.
So the past couple of weeks I've been brewing mead.
Ooh.
Yeah. I have one strawberry mead that should be ready to go into secondary container.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, I'm really hoping. I haven't brewed mead before, but I'm crossing my fingers. So this week it should be going into its secondary containment, which is an anaerobic sort of aging process to make all the bad flavors, kind of mellow in it, while the good flavors, get better, I guess, aging it. And then this weekend, me and a few friends are going to be processing all of the deer meat that we have and making brats.
Nice.
So we have 250 pounds of brats to make on
Oh,
Saturday.
my.
What are you going to do with all these brats?
Many, many, many cookouts.
Okay, because I love venison, so...
Yeah.
Also, I expect to be invited to some of these cookouts.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. Good deal. That sounds fun.
Yeah.
What have I been doing? The only thing that's really happened is I played that volleyball game I told you and Becky about because the intramurals are back again. We destroyed the other team. Well, actually, that's not true. We didn't destroy the other team. We beat the other team, and we got 2 more games tonight, so we're on our trajectory again to get free T-shirts. I should say, Brandon, intramural sports, if you win the league, you get a free T-shirt. So since I want to say I started, we've been on a quest to get free T-shirts by winning volleyball. Hasn't happened yet. I don't know if it will, but we'll see. So... yeah, stay tuned for next week when I tell you all about last week's games. But I'll have other interesting stuff to tell you about in the upcoming week. But yeah, that is going to wrap up another episode of That Science and Nature Show. Thank you so much for listening this week. Thank you, as always, to Webster. And very special thank you to you, Brandon, for coming in and telling us all about the cool wetland stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Remember, you can find past episodes of That Science and Nature Show on Spotify, Amazon, and Google Podcasts. My name is Jeremy Howard. As I've mentioned, you've been listening to That Science and Nature Show. And we're out.